Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in less than 2 years, the Prime Minister has turned a conservative balanced budget into decades of Liberal deficits. Now, leaving my kids with his credit card bill is bad enough, but now the Bank of Canada has indicated that it might raise interest rates soon, something the U.S. has already done. Raising the interest rates by just a quarter point would mean at least $1 billion in new interest charges. So can the Prime Minister explain what new tax hikes he's planning or which programs he'll cut to pay back all the Liberal debt?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for 10 years we had a Conservative government that gave boutique tax credits to the wealthiest Canadians, that neglected the middle class and had the worst record on growth in decades. The fact is, we lowered taxes for the middle class and raised them on the wealthiest 1%, which those members voted against. We delivered a Canada Child benefit that puts more money in the pockets of Canadians, and we have created record numbers of jobs over the past year. We are working hard to deliver on the ambitious promises we made to Canadians, and we're seeing that on the ground.
Speaker, he's spending fast and loose and leaving future generations of Canadians with his bill.
Exactly. For weeks now, we've been asking the Prime Minister to take the right decision to come out with the Sexual Offenders Registry to protect families. It's important to recognize the importance of protecting our children. So why is the Prime Minister not giving parents access to such an important thing as this registry? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, public security and the safety of our children is a priority for all members in this House. Canada already has a national system created by the Chrétien government and a national registry for sex offenders created and funded by the Martin government. Those are key instruments to ensure that high-risk offenders are identified and monitored by the police. We are examining the database to ensure that our children are protected.
Well, Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister suggested that he doesn't have the money to give parents access to information about dangerous criminals living near their kids. Now, this makes no sense because, after all, he's found money to renovate offices, to move his friends from Toronto, and even for luxury vacations. So why won't the Prime Minister just do the right thing? Help parents protect their kids and create the publicly accessible child sex offender.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we take the protection of our kids and our communities very seriously, like every government would. Canada already has a national flagging system created and funded by the Chrétien government and a national sex offender registry created and funded by the Martin government. These are key tools for ensuring that high-risk offenders are identified and tracked by police and prosecutors. The Harper government passed legislation to create a proposed new database, but they never actually set it up and never funded it. We're examining the facts about it in consultation with provinces and territories, victims groups, experts, and other stakeholders.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, contrary to what he has said in the House, national security reviews are ordered by Cabinet. Numerous people are wondering why such a review did not take place for NORSAT. He denies that the U.S. was consulted, but there has been a refusal to comment on this in the U.S. and by the embassy. Why is the Prime Minister misleading us? Mr. Speaker, as I said, each transaction is subject to the Canada Investment Act, and it is subject to a detailed, scrupulous review by national security agencies. In this specific case, I can reiterate that our allies were consulted, including the United States. Our national security experts examined the agreement and the technology and concluded that the agreement did not give rise to any national security problems. We would never compromise our national security.
Mr. Speaker, this isn't the first time the Prime Minister has misled Canadians when it comes to how our allies reacted to one of his decisions. When he withdrew Canada's jets from the fight against ISIS, he claimed that none of our allies objected, but we now know that that isn't true. And here at home, we know all about his consultations. Informing someone of a decision is not a consultation. If the Prime Minister did consult the United States on the North Sat sale, as he claims, can he tell us if any objections were raised and exactly who he consulted with?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every single transaction is subject to national security assessment. This is a multi-step assessment process, and the process was followed. We take the advice and feedback from our national security agencies very seriously, and based on that advice, we proceeded with this transaction. In this particular case, our security agencies did consult with key allies, including the United States, and I can reassure the member and indeed this entire House that we will never compromise on national security.
The honourable member for Outremont.
Now it's an assessment, yeah. Yesterday, we introduced a motion to remove partisanship from the appointment of officers of Parliament. The Liberals said they welcomed it but had a structural problem with our motion. So to show our sincerity, we amended our own motion to address their stated concern. Will the Prime Minister accept this reasonable, amended proposal, or is he just physically incapable of putting an end to partisan appointments, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, we created an independent, open nomination process when we came to office after a decade of partisanship from the previous government, and that's why we've been able to put forward appointments that reflect the diversity of this country. Over 60% female appointments, significant numbers of Indigenous and visible minorities. And we're going to continue to follow all the appropriate processes, including consulting with all parties and having a vote on the proper processes for officers of Parliament.
Angela Merkel that all references to the Paris Agreement be removed from the G20 declaration. This is a fact, not simply because the German newspaper Der Spiegel confirmed it and then yesterday reconfirmed it, but also because the Prime Minister has not denied this specific fact. But what's less clear is why. So why did the Prime Minister do this?
Prime Minister.
Very simple, Mr. Speaker. I did no such thing. I clearly expressed to Angela Merkel that we need to continue to work together on fighting climate change, on remaining committed to Paris. And as the German government confirmed today, quote, he did not ask Chancellor Merkel to delete all references to the climate agreement from the draft G20 document. Canada remains committed to the climate agreement, committed to Paris, and will continue to push for that at G20, at G7, and every opportunity we get, because that is how Canada leads.
The
honourable member for Outremont.
There's an easy way to clarify all this, because the Prime Minister could very simply release the text of his part of that conversation with Merkel. But of course he won't do that, because he knows that it is a fact that he and his government are a fraud when it comes to climate change.
But let's talk about journalists. Will the Prime Minister do what needs to be done to ensure that the bill to protect journalistic sources is adopted before summer?
Journalistic sources.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we remain committed to the Paris Accords. I have said that to every world leader that I've spoken to. We have pushed for that. We were an instrumental part in making sure that it was a strong statement of support from the 6 G7 countries who are moving forward with Paris. We continue to push so it becomes part of the G20 communique. We know that leading on climate change is what Canadians expect and is exactly what this government is doing. in regards to freedom of the press, we continue to defend and promote journalistic freedoms, which is why we're supporting the Senate proposal.
The question was, are we going to get it through before the end of term? And we don't have an answer to that, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said he stood by his Defence Minister's account of the role he played in Afghanistan and that there was no conflict when he blocked an inquiry into the detainee scandal. The Ethics Commissioner has just reported that the Defence Minister, quote, downplayed his role in the transfer of detainees. What consequences will the Minister face for having misled the Ethics Commissioner, or is the Prime Minister just fine with hiding things from Mary Dawson?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the issue of Afghan detainees is one that we take very seriously in this House. That's why there have been no less than 6 investigations into that issue, including one that is ongoing. Indeed, when we were offered, as NDP and Liberals, the opportunity to go through 40,000 documents directly pertaining to that, the NDP refused to do it. We engaged with that. We take very seriously those responsibilities. We will continue to take very seriously what Canadians expect from this government and from this party.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, in the scandal surrounding the high-tech company being sold to the Chinese without a national security review, the Prime Minister keeps saying that he consulted key allies. The problem is that senior U.S. leaders have said that they weren't consulted and they're concerned about Canada's national security, more so than the Prime Minister is. Can the Prime Minister tell us when he met with those people, to whom he spoke? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, all transactions of this nature are subject to a security review. It is a multi-step security process, and the process was respected. We take advice from Canada's national security agencies very seriously, and we have confidence in their work. We proceeded based on their advice. In this specific case, national security agencies consulted the United States, and I want to reassure the member opposite and this House that we will never compromise national security. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, I asked a very simple, clear question. If the Prime Minister is so sure of himself, is he prepared to table all of the documents? Is he prepared to say who was consulted and when? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we take our responsibilities in terms of national security very seriously, and we work with and listen to our national security agencies. We have confidence in those agencies that examined the process, that followed the process, examined protection, consulted with our allies, including the United States, and recommended proceeding with the transaction.
Member for Parry Sound, Muskoka.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's story on the Norsat takeover is getting murkier and murkier by the day, indeed the hour, Mr. Speaker. We know these facts. It was the Liberal cabinet alone who chose to forego the National Security Review. That's a fact. It's a fact that the Prime Minister is claiming that our allies have somehow approved this, and yet those same U.S. allies are saying publicly that they have grave concerns, Mr. Speaker, so something is not adding up. And we ask again, take away the speaking notes. I would encourage the Prime Minister, take those away, just answer the question in the House. Who did they consult with? Which allies?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there is in place and has been in place for many years a process whereby national security concerns are addressed and followed. And the fact is we have our security agencies that went through the proper process in regards to this transaction, including consulting with our allies, including the United States, and signaled that we could move forward with this transaction. That is the process that is forward. We will never compromise national security, and as the member knows, we follow the process in this situation.
The Honourable Member for Parry Sound, Muskoka.
Mr. Speaker, why won't the Prime Minister be open and transparent in this House about who exactly was consulted on this deal? which elements of the U.S. administration were consulted. What did they say? Mr. Speaker, we know through this transaction that the Liberals are trying to appease Chinese official interests as they move forward with a free trade deal with China. We know that, but we are concerned about Canadian security and we're concerned about North American security. Who did they consult with? Who did they consult with? Let us know.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we take very seriously our national security and always will. That's why we ensure that the process is rigorously followed for transactions of this type. Our national security agencies were engaged with this process, consulted with our allies, did the work they are supposed to do. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we trust our national security agencies. We believe in their capacity to do their job as mandated by the government, and we respect the fact that they are able to do their work in full respect of the law and the principles that Canada lays out.
Member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, I've listened to the Prime Minister very carefully today. This is not a question about trust in our national security agencies. This is about the competence and the negligence within the Cabinet of the Government of Canada. And it's simply this. They have many connections which they laud all the time in terms of talking to the United States. Did any single Cabinet Minister on the other side give a heads up to their counterpart in the United States and say, is this a good idea? Because I want to do a gut check. Because you know who's doing a gut check, Mr. Speaker? The Canadian public. And I want to know, who did they talk to and what did they learn?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is wrong. This is about trusting our national security agencies to do their job and follow the processes. Mr. Speaker, our national security agencies engaged in the rigorous process that we have forward, made determinations based on their investigations, based on conversations with our allies, including the United States, and reported to this government that it would be something we could move forward, that could move forward. That, Mr. Speaker, involves trusting our civil servants and our national security agencies, which on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we do.
The honourable member for Milton.
But, Mr. Speaker, the Canadian public elected a government to do exactly what we're supposed to do here, which is to take the information from the public service and make sure that the right determination is being made. They have failed abysmally in this decision-making. I have sat at this table and I understand fully the importance of weighing so many different variables in making these decisions. They are hiding behind the skirt of the national security agencies because they're afraid that they're going to be seen to not appeasing the Chinese government because of whatever they want to do. Mr. Speaker, this is wrong.
The honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to take this occasion to wish all public servants a happy National Public Service Week. After 10 years of a government that did not listen to our public servants, did not respect the work they did, did whatever it wanted based on ideology and not facts, we are proud that we respect our public servants, that we listen to them, that we expect them to fulfill their responsibilities with professionalism and accuracy, and that, Mr. Speaker, is exactly what our national security agencies do every day to protect Canadians and our interests.
L'honorable député d'Abitibi.
The honourable member for Abitibi Bay James Nunavik Kiyu. Order, please.
For 2 decades, the Indigenous peoples co-drafted the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and it's been 10 years since its adoption by the UN General Assembly. Last December, the Prime Minister promised, once again, all chiefs that he remained committed to its adoption and implementation. Yet on Monday, the Prime Minister suggested that the declaration would be tantamount to colonial imposition. How can the declaration be imposed on us if we wrote it, Mr. Speaker? Which is it, yes or no? Will his government support Bill C-262?
The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government has been clear. We are committed to implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In doing so, we will ensure that implementation of this declaration goes beyond mere words. It must be translated into practical benefits on the ground. Simply adopting the declaration word for word into law ignores Canada's Section 35 framework and the hard work necessary to bring about real change. We're committed to working in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples to identify which laws, policies and practices need to be changed to give full effect to UNDRIP.
The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals approved the foreign takeover of a major BC provider of seniors care by Onbong, a huge Chinese conglomerate. They did so despite serious concerns raised by the U.S. and many others about this company's murky ownership structure. Now, we see the chairman of Onbong has been arrested on suspected corruption charges. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about the well-being of BC seniors. Why did the government fail in their due diligence, and will they revisit their decision to ensure Canadians are protected?
Hear, hear.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that member well knows that BC's regulatory regime is robust and imposes rigorous standards of care on all operators of residential care and assisted living facilities. Cedar Tree has confirmed its strong commitment to the ongoing quality of operations of the Canadian retirement residences and to its healthcare workers. They will remain subject to provincial oversight on senior care facilities, ensuring rules for the care of seniors continue to be followed, and will keep the current number of full and part-time jobs.
The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we are seeing the interests of Canadians being put behind the interests of the Liberals and the appeasement they want to achieve with the Chinese. So our question, though, is simple. Who in the U.S. do the national security agencies consult with? It's a very simple question. Canadians deserve to know who was consulted with in the United States.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we trust our public servants. We trust our national security agencies to do the important work every day of keeping Canadians safe, of defending our interests. Our national security agencies went through the process. They consulted with our allies. They confirmed to us that we could move forward. That is exactly what we do. For the member opposite to suggest that somehow our civil servants are not up to the tasks they are given, that our national security agencies are incapable of doing their job, is quite frankly what we saw for 10 years and why they're now in opposition.
Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Let's try again. Either the Prime Minister doesn't know who these national security agencies consulted with, or he's misleading this House. Which one is it? And he can tell us right now. If he knows, would he please tell this House who these national security agencies consulted with in the United States? Put the talking points away and tell us, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, under the Investment Canada Act, there is a process whereby our national security agencies look at transactions, evaluate them in terms of national interests, consult with allies, including the United States in this case, and make a determination on whether or not it is safe to move forward. This process isn't a new process that we brought in. It's a process that has existed for many years, and our national security agencies and civil service have demonstrated their ability to protect Canada's interests and deliver on what we ask them to.
Order. The member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, 4 months ago, this government rushed to sell senior care facilities in Canada to a Chinese conglomerate. Onbong Insurance had been denied in many other countries from buying assets. Now we learned that Mr. Wu, the chairman, has been charged with vague accusations, including corruption, and there's speculation that the Chinese government, as part of their effort to re-establish state-owned enterprises, I think I have a number of constituents who have asked me regularly and are very concerned. Can he tell us who owns their home?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I can reassure the residents that indeed BC has a strong and robust regulatory regime that imposes rigorous standards of care on all operators of residential care and assisted living facilities. Cedar Tree has confirmed its strong commitment to the ongoing quality of operations of its Canadian retirement residences. They will continue to remain subject to all provincial oversight in upholding the highest standards of care for our seniors.
The honourable member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, he perhaps is not aware that a whole number of those seniors immediately got a notice that they had to be removed from their facilities. It was absolutely shameful.
Terrible.
They approved the sale of our senior cares to Onbong. They can't tell us who owns the conglomerate. They have the only face of that business was the chairman, who, of course, is now in jail with these accusations. They say everything's so fine. The minister says, I'm going to keep watching, I'm okay. Well, we're not convinced that things are okay. So would he stand up and tell us who owns the homes of the seniors of Canada?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the provincial governments across this country have the responsibility for imposing rigorous regulatory regimes to ensure the protection of our seniors, regardless of who owns and operates the various senior care centres. Cedar Tree has continued to emphasize its rigorous standards of care, and we're going to make sure that the provincial oversight remains strong and that all proper rules and regulations are followed to ensure proper care for our seniors right across this country. This is something we take seriously and will continue to stand up for.
Member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, Monday the U.S. dairy industry formally asked trade officials to come after the Canadian dairy industry in NAFTA renegotiations. New Democrats have repeatedly stood in this House highlighting trade attacks on our supply-managed dairy industry. With the U.S. blaming Canadian farmers for their own overproduction, we need more than vague assurances from this government. It's clear to everyone that dairy will be a top priority in the U.S. administration. Instead of the same meaningless talking points, will the Prime Minister draw a red line and commit to no expanded market access?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's a Liberal government that created supply management over 40 years ago. The Liberal Party has always defended supply management, and we always will defend supply management because it protects our consumers, it protects our producers, it creates opportunities for growth and security in our production of dairy products. We know, and we have been able to sign significant trade deals internationally, like NAFTA, like CETA, while protecting our dairy industry, while protecting supply management, and we are going to continue to do just that.
The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. The Liberals promised to compensate dairy and cheese producers for CETA-related losses. Instead, they announced a transition program that doesn't even cover half the anticipated losses. The program's so discouraging for Quebec's dairy industry that the official opposition in Quebec City is calling for a 6-month delay in adoption of the trade deal to give the federal government time to see the light. When is the Prime Minister going to confirm that he will fully compensate the dairy and cheese sector? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the CETA gives Canadian producers and consumers access to a massive market of hundreds of millions of people to sell our products. We know that it's going to require some transition period, but I am so proud of our dairy producers in Quebec and Canada. They will have to adapt. That's why we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars to help them with the transition so that they can take full advantage of the European trade deal. We are working with our dairy industry to defend it, to support it, and to ensure beautiful success on the world market.
Mr. Speaker, Atlantic Canada faces a number of unique challenges in growing our economy and encouraging businesses to innovate and export. One of those challenges is helping high-growth potential firms grow and stay in Atlantic Canada. These firms are generally small in size, but their impact is significant. They are more likely to invest in their companies and people while also exporting more than the average Canadian business. Can the Prime Minister please tell this House how the government is helping these firms in Atlantic Canada?
The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Fundy Royal for the excellent question, and in fact all of the Atlantic MPs for their hard work on behalf of Atlantic Canadians, of all parties. With the newly launched Atlantic Growth Strategy, our government is creating the conditions for more well-paying jobs in Atlantic Canada by working with the Atlantic provinces to provide companies with a one-stop shop for access to both federal and provincial supports. Since the program's launch, the number of companies companies participating has more than doubled, Mr. Speaker. This will result in more Atlantic Canadian companies expanding, becoming more competitive, and creating well-paying jobs in their communities. It's all part of growth for Atlantic.
The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou.
On these beautiful sunny weeks, thousands of public servants don't get paid still at all. That's how much respect the Prime Minister has for them. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, in response to responding to an access to information request isn't a tough concept to grasp, and yet a Shared Services Canada employee, who's also the president of the Liberal Riding Association in Glengarry Prescott Russell, had the nerve to delete 398 pages of emails after receiving an ATIP request. This is tangible evidence that the Liberals are willing to sacrifice transparency in order to save the party elite. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister admit that deleting these emails was illegal? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this is a very troubling story, and that is why people have been called to account. The process was followed, and it's now with the Justice Minister's office and the Attorney General's office to see what the next steps will be. We take this partisanship extremely seriously because it has no place in our public service.
Phil.
Mr. Val Trudeau, who has a last name that's investigated a lot around here, Mr. Speaker, is a director at Shared Services who illegally deleted 398 pages of emails related to the Liberal Party from a government server. Trudeau is a Liberal Party Association president. It's highly doubtful that the parliamentary secretary, a former national director of the Liberal Party, and a Liberal minister can independently investigate illegal activity by this Liberal activist. What are they covering up? And will the Prime Minister commit today to have the Director of Public Prosecutions investigate this?
Hear, hear. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we expect all employees to meet the highest level of ethical behaviour and decision-making as set out by the Values and Ethics Code for the public sector. Let me be clear. All rules should be appropriately followed at all times. Shared Services Canada took this situation very seriously, immediately launched an investigation, and notified the Information Commissioner. As is usual, this matter has now been referred to the Attorney General's office.
Member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe the Minister of Heritage should review the Values and Ethics Code for the public service, especially the chapter on conflict of interest. Because once again, we see her staff being lobbied by their former employers. In fact, her chief of staff has been lobbied 6 times by Google Canada. The problem? Google Canada was her former employer. And anyone with a basic understanding of ethics would know this is a blatant conflict of interest. Is the Prime Minister willfully ignorant of the conflicts of interest within his own ministry, or does he just not care?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, as we've said many times, creative industries are going through a period of disruption brought on by the digital shift. The Minister of Canadian Heritage has met with all major digital platforms as part of our review of Canadian content in the digital age. The expertise and broad knowledge of her Chief of Staff in regards to the digital landscape is essential in our assessment of how best to support the sector during this transition. She has been fully transparent about her former employment with Google Canada, including with the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner.
The honourable member for Beauport, Côte-de-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. In the wake of conflicts of interest that the Liberal Party has to account for, yet another conflict has emerged involving the Heritage Minister. Her current Chief of Staff, a former Google employee, attended multiple meetings with her former employer. The Broadcasting Act is up for review. What better than to consult with those who will benefit from the review? Are the Prime Minister and his ministers going to have to take an Ethics 101 course for the rules to get followed? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we all know that creative industries in Canada are dealing with major obstacles in the digital era. The minister met with major stakeholders in connection with reforms to the legislation. and the in-depth knowledge and experience of her Chief of Staff are an essential asset in assessing how best to support the industry during this transition. She's always been entirely transparent about her former employment with Google Canada and with the Ethics Commissioner. The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. We learned yesterday that 2 patients in Quebec with incurable health issues who are experiencing unbearable pain are having to turn to the courts for medical assistance in dying. And yet they meet all the criteria set out by the Supreme Court in the Carter decision. The catch, the medical assistance in dying legislation is overly restrictive in its requirement for reasonably foreseeable death. This is preventing the individuals in question from getting the help they need to end their suffering. What pretext is this government going to use again before showing some genuine compassion? Mr. Speaker, we passed legislation which set out a regulatory framework for medical assistance in dying in Canada in order to protect the most vulnerable Canadians while respecting the rights and freedoms of choice. It's very important to strike the right balance, but it's delicate. We know that there is still work to be done in our society. Things are evolving, but we tried to strike the right balance between protecting the most vulnerable and allowing Canadians freedom of choice. This is an important issue for society. It's important for individuals. I think we struck the right balance.
Mr. Speaker, I don't normally praise the Senate, but today senators are trying to separate the Infrastructure Bank from the Liberal Omnibus Budget Bill. Now, this is exactly what the NDP tried to do in this place, but the Liberals blocked our attempts. Many experts, including the former parliamentary budget officer, have raised serious concerns about the Liberals' Infrastructure Bank. So, will this Prime Minister finally do the right thing and scrap the Infrastructure Bank from their omnibus bill?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we were the only party in the last election that committed to actually investing in the kinds of infrastructure that Canadians needed. We know that proper investment in the future matters for public transit users, matters for social housing, matters for green infrastructure that will protect people in the coming years. We put forward $180 billion in infrastructure spending in the coming years, but we recognize that even that's not enough, and being innovative about bringing forward new ways to find financing for the infrastructure that Canadians need to grow the economy and build for the future is something important that we've done.
The honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberals are going to end any prospect of the public child sex offender registry that was passed by this House 2 years ago from becoming a reality. Now, first of all, they said they didn't have any funds. Now they just want it cancelled. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the Prime Minister to make the rights and interests of innocent and law-abiding Canadians the #1 priority. What is the problem with that?
What's the problem? Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the safety of our children and our communities is obviously a priority for this government, as it is for any Canadian government. There is no partisanship in this. That's why we recognize that we have a national flagging system created by the Chrétien government. We have a national sex offender registry created by the Martin government. And we look at the current proposal around a database that was proposed by the Harper government, but not funded and not implemented. And we're consulting with various community leaders, police groups, protection and victim services to ensure that however we move forward, we are protecting victims and
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's record is terrible. When it's time for concrete steps to protect kids, the Liberal government is an epic fail. They're trying to pass the buck to the provinces. We saw it with marijuana. The Prime Minister wants to legalize possession for 12 to 18-year-olds. We see it with the pedophile registry. The Liberals don't want communities to know when an offender is living in their area. When are they finally going to take their role seriously, protect our kids, and make the sex offender register accessible to all parents? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, whoever suggests that there's anyone here in the House that doesn't take protecting our children seriously in our communities is not worthy of being here. We all know that we all have to do everything we can to protect our communities and our young people. That is why we are moving forward with controlling and regulating marijuana. That is why we are looking at proposals to protect children better, and why we are defending the current national sex offender registry. We know this is a priority for everyone, protecting our kids.
St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, in minutes, this House will vote on a Liberal motion to defeat Wynn's Law, a law that would close a criminal code loophole that cost the life of Constable Wynn. Wynn's Law would simply require prosecutors to lead evidence of the criminal history of bail applicants so that what happened to Constable Wynn never happens again. How, in good conscience, can the Liberals oppose this?
Mr. Speaker, again, I extend my deepest sympathies to Constable David Wynn and especially his widow, Shelley.
Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I extend my deepest condolences to the family of Constable David Wynn, including to his widow, Shelley. I know the Minister of Justice and her had a good chat a number of months ago. We took the proposal around Wynn's Law. We sent it to committee, where it was studied, where it was heard experts on it. It was examined to see whether indeed it would do what it is purported to do. The committee made a determination, and we respect the work of committees to do exactly those kinds of determinations.
Order. The Honourable Member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, families across Canada know the importance childcare has in their daily lives. From working parents to single parents to all manners of families, parents in my riding want to provide the best for their children, to contribute to their development and their communities, to know their representative is a strong advocate for their priorities. This is why on Monday, I was very proud to see the federal government re-engage in early learning and childcare across Canada with a $7.5 billion investment. Wow. Can the Prime Minister inform us on the next step he will be taking?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Brampton South for her question, for the hard work she does in her community and for families in her community. Every child deserves access to quality early learning and childcare. The framework signed this week will help more Canadian families have access to affordable, high-quality, flexible and inclusive childcare. It will focus on the most vulnerable children and ensure that more childcare is language appropriate for French and English minorities and culturally appropriate for Indigenous children. Our government is concentrated on finding real solutions for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. That's what we promised to Canadians. That's what we're delivering.
The honourable member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
Terry stood in this House and
Start again.
Good. Mr. Speaker, on May 18th, the Liberal House Leader's Parliamentary Secretary stood in this House and said this: "I can't say enough about the Canadian Autism Partnership and what it's been able to accomplish to date. I applaud each and every person involved in that." But on May 30th, that same member stood in solidarity with his Liberal colleagues and opposed the Canadian Autism Partnership and the interests of Canadians living with autism. Mr. Speaker, what did the Prime Minister say to make the Parliamentary Secretary vote against the very existence of the organization he praised less than 2 weeks earlier?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize that autism spectrum disorder has a significant and lifelong impact on individuals and families. Federal investments in research, data improvements, surveillance, and trading skills are supported supporting those with autism and their families. There is an extraordinary network of stakeholders across the country raising awareness and providing services to families. Our government will continue to support these efforts through our programs. Through the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the Government of Canada has invested more than $39 million in autism research over the past 5 years. We're going to continue to work with communities and parents.
The honourable member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, a united front has emerged in Quebec against the CRTC decision on French language content. Today, I expect an answer from the member for Papineau, not because it's Wednesday, but because the PMO has had more meetings with Bell lobbyists than the Heritage Minister. Maybe that's what explains his radio silence on this issue. It's like a silent film. After all his meetings with Bell and Chorus specifically on broadcasting, can the Prime Minister assure the united front of cultural stakeholders that he will fight by their side to get this bad decision quashed? Will he send it back to the CRTC, yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Our government firmly believes in the importance of arts and culture, and that's why we've invested more than $1.9 billion in that area. One of the largest investments in the past 30 years. We've done so because we're convinced that arts and culture are an important driver for the economy and for our identity. We are now studying the impact of the CRTC decision.
And Matapedia.
Honourable Member for Avignon. Mr. Speaker, as you know, our government committed to growing the economy and strengthening the middle class. Last week, we saw once again the published data showed that our plan is working. Job statistics were released and the news was encouraging, particularly for Quebecers. Could the Prime Minister please tell the House what the job statistics show? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'd like to thank the member for Avignon-Lamétis-Matane-Matapédia for his question and his leadership within the Quebec caucus. Mr. Speaker, Canadians elected this government to grow the economy and create good jobs. In the past 6 months, the economy has created over 250,000 full-time jobs, the strongest growth in the past 15 years. In Quebec, the unemployment rate dropped from 6.6 to 6%. Its lowest level since 1976. Our plan is working, and we will continue to invest in Canadian workers to grow the economy long term.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister keeps pointing to research funding as cover for not supporting the Canadian Autism Partnership. Does he understand how ridiculous this is? 4 members of the Partnership Working Group are among the world's top autism researchers. Lonnie Zwagenbaum from the University of Alberta, Stelios Georgiadis from McMaster, Jonathan Weiss from York University, and Stephen Shearer from Sick Kids. These researchers want their research to actually be used to benefit Canadian families who desperately need it. When will the Prime Minister stop hiding behind our world-class researchers and support them in helping Canadians with autism?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, on the contrary, we're happy to support our world-class researchers in a broad range of issues. On autism, this government, through the Canadian Institute for Health Research, has invested more than $39 million in autism research over the past 5 years. And we will continue to work with community leaders, continue to work with stakeholders, continue to work with families to address the very real challenges faced by people living with autism and their families. That is a commitment we're continuing to make in our commitment to research, our commitment to families, our commitment to helping Canadians live better lives.
Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that the Prime Minister has clarified for the second time the Der Spiegel story and has clearly said that he never asked Chancellor Merkel to remove references to the Paris Accord from the G20 summit declaration, let me flip it to the affirmative and ask the Prime Minister to confirm that Canada will stand with Germany and insist that commitment to the Paris Accord be in the G20 final declaration.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes, we will. We remain steadfastly committed to the Paris Accords. Our Environment Minister and our government was instrumental in actually making sure that the Paris Accords became a reality. We will continue to push for the respect and the support for Paris at the G7 communique, as we did, and also in the G20 coming up in Hamburg. I would like to take this moment also to congratulate the Conservative Party for recognizing that climate change is real and supporting the Paris Accords as well. This is an important moment for Canada as we see unanimously the need to move forward with real action to reduce our carbon emissions. I look forward to hearing